So far, we have discussed about the tax burden entirely on consumer or entirely on producer. But now I'm going to teach you when more tax burden falls on consumer and less on producer. So there are two conditions for this. When demand is relatively inelastic, means large change in price will lead to small change in quantity demand, and supply is relatively elastic, mean supply curve will be flatter and it will show that a small change in price will lead to greater change in quantity supplied. And now we can make graph for satisfying these conditions. If we draw a relatively inelastic demand curve, then demand curve will be steeper like this. So this is demand curve, and relatively flatter supply curve like this. So this is supply curve. Initially equilibrium takes place at point E, where equilibrium price is P and equilibrium quantity is definitely Q. Now if there is imposition of tax by the government, then supply curve will shift to the left, and as a basic principle, when supply falls, it shifts to the left. So new supply curve is S1. As a result, equilibrium has shifted to E1, where new price which consumers will pay is P1. And now what we have to do is we have to find out per unit tax, and per unit tax is the vertical gap between two supply curves. So from new equilibrium to initial supply curve, from E1 to point B, we will have to draw perpendicular. So per unit tax is E1B. If we join point B to the price line, then we will get another price P2 which producers will receive. So per unit tax is E1B or P1 to P2 or P1 P2, because perpendicular P1 P2 and E1B both are equal. And now we have to find out total amount of tax. And to find out total amount of tax, what we do is we multiply height and base. So height is E1A, so base is P2B. P2B is the base. So if we multiply these values, we will get the area of this rectangle. So P1, E1, B and P2 is the total amount of tax. Out of this tax, consumers will pay this much, which is above initial equilibrium price, and producers will pay this much, which is below initial equilibrium price. So tax burden on consumers as per this figure will be P1, E1, and we can label this point which is in between E1 and B, and let's say this is point C. So P1, E1, C and P is the tax which is paid by the consumers, and tax burden on producer is equal to the area P, C, B and P2. So this is how we can find out the amount of tax when it falls mainly on consumer and less on producer. So you can see the area of consumer tax burden is this much, which is greater, and the area of producer tax burden is this much, which is much smaller. So tax burden on consumer is more than the tax burden on producer.